When I walked into the open-plan floor of Genexia Therapeutics that morning, the first thing I heard was Brandon Keller's voice slicing through the air like he was auditioning for a reality show. "Your lab coat's wrinkled," he announced loudly from across the office, the tone smug enough to curdle milk. He leaned against a standing desk, like a man who believed posture alone could qualify him to run a federally funded biotech company. Optics matter now that we're a real organization. I had been at Genexia for a grand total of 6 weeks. 6! And already this walking LinkedIn post, complete with blow-dried hair and 600 sneakers, had offered more commentary on my wardrobe than on any of the research protocols I actually oversaw. As if the crease of my coat affected the integrity of the $75 million NIH grant that underpinned the entire company's valuation. I didn't respond. I simply cataloged it, mentally adding that moment to the ever-growing list of red flags Brandon had waved in my direction since day one. I was up to 47 so far. The first flag had shown up within minutes of my onboarding when he introduced me to the team as our science gal. Then, later that afternoon, he pitched himself to the board as the one overseeing all administrative components of the grant, conveniently erasing the fact that I, Dr. Lauren Hale, was the principal investigator, the PI, the only person legally authorized to plan, direct, supervise, or approve a single dollar of that federal research budget. I had run multi-million-dollar clinical trials long before Brandon finished his degree in digital innovation and disruption. But here I was being asked whether I could also book lunch for his brand positioning session with some crypto-aligned influencer network. Before we go any further, if you've survived in a startup long enough to understand the level of dysfunction I'm describing, hit subscribe and like this video. Helps our team bring you more tales of regulatory nightmares and corporate hubris. Anyway, back to Brandon. Brandon Keller, acting CEO. A title that felt more like a costume he'd put on for Halloween and never bothered to take off. He had no background in biotech, no background in medicine, no background in research. But he had once made a mildly viral TikTok about biohacking morning routines, and apparently that was enough for the board to confuse him for a visionary. To be fair, I tried, in the beginning, to be optimistic. I'd met plenty of overly confident founders who eventually humbled themselves when reality corrected them. Brandon, though, wasn't interested in reality. He was interested in performance. And I had the audacity to exist in his line of sight without applauding. The lab team respected me. They knew my publications, my track record, my clinical success rates. But Brandon had a way of bending perception around himself. Like gravity, but dumber. In meetings, he'd interrupt me halfway through explaining a trial timeline so he could reframe my sentences in buzzwords. When I submitted our mandatory PI report through the federal portal, he downloaded the PDF, slapped his name on the title slide, and sent it to investors as if he had filed it himself. The insults were one thing, the risk was another. The turning point came on a Thursday morning, walking past the conference room. Brandon was inside with our CFO, Anthony Ward, drawing an insane flowchart on the whiteboard. "We'll just transfer $5 million from the federal account to marketing," he said casually, like he was explaining a lemonade stand budget. "Run the campaign. Boost pre-orders. Then once Series B closes, boom, move the money back." Anthony looked nauseated. Brandon looked thrilled. When I stepped inside, he beamed at me like I was late to my own surprise party. "Lauren, perfect timing. We need you to authorize the transfer from the grant account." "Authorize what?" I asked flatly. "You're the PI," he said, gesturing dramatically. "Just check whatever boxes they need. We're planning a big launch experience next week. Trust me, this is how scale works." "No," I said quietly. "This is how people go to prison." He blinked, confused, like the idea of consequences had never once entered his orbit. I didn't raise my voice, didn't lecture. Didn't try to educate a man whose ego was impervious to knowledge. I just looked Brandon dead in the eye and said, "I'll review the grant terms. but you should speak with legal before assuming we can repurpose restricted funds. He rolled his eyes like I'd interrupted his podcast recording. Jesus, Lauren, it's not a party. It's a launch experience. Big difference. His grin said he thought he'd already won. I walked out without another word, shut my office door, and opened the NIH grant agreement on my laptop. I reread every clause, every restriction, every line describing authorized expenditures, and then I made a new folder. I named it Chain of Custody. Inside it, I dropped screenshots, emails, and a photo of the whiteboard scribbles he'd drawn. The circus had started, but I wasn't there to be part of the audience. The Slack notification hit the next morning at 7:12 a.m., a cold slap before caffeine. CEO meeting, mandatory. 8 o'clock a.m. Conf A. No agenda. No context. Just Brandon summoning us like a villain in a low-budget spy movie. I walked in with lukewarm break room coffee and took my usual seat near the end of the table. Brandon sat at the head, centered like he believed furniture obeyed him. "All right, team," he said, clapping like a CrossFit coach on pre-workout. Behind him, the screen lit up with a Google slide titled Q3 Hype Stack. Let's go. I nearly choked on my coffee. He launched into what he believed was brilliance. Influencer blitzes, pop-up activation zones at biotech conferences, branded lab coats, TikToks with fake scientists pretending to shout, "We cured it!" A keynote speaker who was, unbelievably, an ex-reality show contestant turned neuro-wellness futurist. Total projected budget, $5.2 million. Source, Slide 6. Federal Grant Discretionary Funds. I leaned forward. "Brandon, those aren't discretionary funds. That's federal research money." He blinked like I'd spoken in hieroglyphs. "Right, but it's our money, right? The company's?" "No," I said slowly. "It's the government's. We're stewards. Bound by the approved scope of work, line item restrictions, and NIH oversight. There's no influencer zone in there." He chuckled, smirking at Anthony like I was an adorable but confused toddler. "Lauren, this is why I brought you in. You're smart, no doubt. But you don't get startup velocity. You've got to disrupt. You've got to scale. You want results? You can't play small. You want to misappropriate federal funds?" I said calmly. "That's not scaling. That's federal fraud." Silence crashed over the room. Even Anthony stopped breathing. Brandon's smile stayed, but the twitch in his jaw gave him away. "I think we can reframe the line items. Reallocate. The feds aren't going to audit a marketing sprint." He was wrong. Dead wrong. But certainty was his superpower. Ignorant certainty. The others in the room stared at their notes, at the table, anywhere but at me. They didn't have to back me. I wasn't there to win a popularity contest. I was there to keep the company out of handcuffs. "I won't authorize it," I said. Steady, controlled. As the principal investigator, I hold fiduciary authority over all expenditures. "You need my signature. You won't get it." Brandon scoffed. "You're overthinking it." "I'll send it to Anthony. He can get the paperwork moving." And just like that, he ended the meeting. No vote, no accountability. Just stood up and walked out, convinced rules were for other people. In the hallway, Anthony rushed up to me, pale as printer paper. "Lauren, if Brandon sends a transfer request, you're not liable, right?" I stared at him. "If you touch that account without documented PI authorization, you are. So is Brandon. So is anyone involved." He swallowed so hard I could hear it. Then he sprinted back to his desk like he was fleeing a burning building. I didn't follow. My job wasn't to babysit grown adults with executive titles. My job was to safeguard the research, the lab, and the 40 people whose careers depended on this trial. That afternoon, I filed 3 things. A memo to NIH flagging an internal dispute regarding fund usage. A locked PDF of Brandon's slides, annotated. and a transcript of our conversation pulled from the office meeting recording system that Brandon never remembered existed. My resolve solidified. This wasn't annoyance anymore. It wasn't politics. It was ethics. And I intended to be the last adult standing when Brandon's startup fever dream finally imploded. The email landed in my inbox Monday morning with the kind of corporate vagueness that always means trouble. Subject: Updated org chart. For visibility only. It sat between a reminder about fridge etiquette and an invite to Brandon's fireside hype chat with some VC-backed influencer who once sold nootropic smoothies shaped like Mount Rushmore. I clicked it and stared. For a full 30 seconds, I didn't blink. There I was, bottom third of the chart. Project lead, clinical ops. Not principal investigator. Not executive director. Not even a dotted line connection to the compliance office. Just project lead. Like I was organizing a bake sale rather than managing a $75 million federal research program. No meeting. No memo. No justification. Just an administrative downgrading of the only legally required role in the entire company. I forwarded it to HR. 2 hours later, Tara, an HR generalist with the emotional stability of a wet paper towel, knocked on my door, clutching a manila folder like a flotation device. "So," she began, visibly sweating, "this is part of a broader cleanup effort, just standardizing titles across verticals. You know how startups get messy." "Messy," I repeated. "Right." She nodded far too eagerly. "You're still doing the same work. It's just optics." Investors were confused by Principal Investigator. "It's a federally codified legal role," I said, "defined in the grant contract." She blinked as if I'd spoken in another language. "I can escalate that if you want?" There was no point. HR here was decorative. A mop with email access. That afternoon, I learned something else. Something worse. I'd been removed from the quarterly sync with our lead investor and the NIH liaison. A meeting I had prepared outlines for. A meeting I was legally and operationally required to attend. I only found out because a junior scientist nervously asked whether I'd reviewed the updated pitch deck. "What updated deck?" I asked. His blood drained from his face. He stammered. I searched the shared drive, and there it was. Vision 2.0. Accelerating Biosolutions in the Metaverse. The NIH grant logo, pixelated, distorted, off-brand, sat beneath a cartoon giraffe wearing AR goggles and a lab coat. A pitch for a VR diagnostic platform tied to blockchain health tokens. I wish I were joking. My hands went cold. The next day, Brandon posted a LinkedIn selfie from a startup showcase, standing in front of my trial schematic while holding a glowing blue cocktail. When science meets scalability, huge shout out to our amazing science team. You know who you are. A silence settled over me. Not hurt, not humiliation, something colder, something sharper. They weren't ignoring me. They were erasing me. But I didn't earn my career by being quiet. So, I pulled out my notebook and started documenting. Every meeting I was excluded from. Every deck where my name disappeared. Every misuse of the NIH insignia. I didn't complain. I didn't argue. I archived. Later that week, I called the NIH program liaison directly. I explained, carefully, that I had concerns about internal compliance drift. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He only said, "If you have documentation, send it to the secure portal. We'll handle the rest." Then he added, "Make sure they don't remove you from the contract. Your designation controls fund access." They didn't understand the ecosystem they were tampering with. NIH grants aren't startup play money. They're legal instruments woven into federal oversight systems. And my name was still on every disbursement. You can call me a project lead all you want, but I still held the keys to the vault. The phrase chain of custody echoed in my head with each passing day. Every Slack message Brandon sent dripping with entitlement. Every deck repackaging our research as a branding stunt. Every budget request that smelled like smoke. So I built folders, then subfolders, then sub-subfolders, each filled with PDFs, screenshots, emails, audio clips. One folder was labeled Unauthorized Budget Requests, another, Branding Violations. My personal favorite, Brandon being Brandon. At 11:43 a.m. on a Thursday, he slacked. Anthony, can we just move $200K from line 18 and call it a software pilot? Lauren doesn't need to sign, right? It's internal. I screenshotted it, exported the thread, filed it. At 3:17 p.m., he emailed a revised reorg memo, backdated 2 weeks, with my signature clumsily forged in a mismatched font. I printed it, highlighted the forgery, added it to the pile. There wasn't one explosion, no singular moment of chaos. The violations stacked quietly, like matchsticks. And Brandon, bless his delusional confidence, kept lighting them. By the end of the week, my folders looked like a legal thriller written in real time. I called the NIH program officer again. No small talk this time. I have proof of forged documents, unauthorized funding requests, and improper use of federal branding. Do I send it to you or directly to OIG? He didn't hesitate. Send it to this encrypted Dropbox. Label it with the grant ID. Someone from oversight will follow up. Then he added, don't escalate internally, and don't tip them off. If there's misuse, we'll see it. He hung up. That was all. That night, I called my attorney, Alyssa Grant, a woman who read compliance appendices like bedtime stories and once scared a Harvard PI into rewriting an entire grant with the phrase, "Try me again." She answered on the second ring. You're being squeezed out, aren't you? I'm being erased, I said. Then here's our move. We went line by line through the NIPI clause, and it was even better than I remembered. Not only was my role non-transferable without federal authorization, it was tied to disbursement eligibility, IP jurisdiction, publication rights, and trial site certifications. No acting CEO, no board, no investor, no one, not even the founder, could override it without triggering a full compliance review, which meant if Brandon pushed too far, the entire grant would freeze. Good, Alyssa said. Let him keep playing CEO. You keep the receipts. So I did. I saved hallway comments. One day, before a call with a major pharma partner, Brandon smirked and said, You're not invited, Lauren. It's more vibe than data. Clip saved. In another meeting, when I mentioned protocol compliance, he muttered, Science people always think they're the smartest in the room. Audio exported. Even interns whispered to me now. Hey, Dr. Hale, they used your grant slides at the investor dinner last night, but your name was gone. Or, I found this older version of the budget with your title deleted. Do you want a copy? Yes. Yes, I did. By Thursday, my archive resembled a crime scene. By Friday, it was a forensic investigation. And that same Friday, the final shove arrived. The email came from an address so generically federal adjacent it might as well have worn sunglasses. Grant compliance at Fed Biomonitor. Us. Inside was a short message referencing a recent budget reallocation notice submitted by our internal grants administrator. Attached, Q2, updated budget justification, genexia.pdf. I opened it, and my pulse dropped to a calm I recognized from emergencies. Brandon, idiot, narcissist, visionary of nothing, had submitted a completely fabricated budget to NIH. It listed $1.2 million in accelerated hiring needs, $600K in community outreach, and a miraculous $400K in strategic media investments. The signature line carried my name, forged, again. There was a request for confirmation. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Not panicked, not angry, just still. Then I typed one sentence in reply. Acknowledged. I have retained legal counsel. No signature, no explanation. And I hit send. The calm that followed was almost serene. People confuse silence with surrender. They mistake composure for compliance. They forget that the quietest person in the room might be the one holding the detonator. Brandon thought removing me from org charts meant he had removed my power. He truly believed a title change could overwrite federal law. He forgot that I didn't need shouting matches or leadership theatrics. I needed two things: the truth and a paper trail, and I had both. The meeting invite arrived late Friday afternoon, the corporate witching hour. Subject: board vote, strategic realignment and grant oversight simplification. Monday, boardroom east, 30 minutes. My name was CC'd as an afterthought, a courtesy, a joke. Brandon strutted through the lab at 10:07 a.m. like a man auditioning for CEO of the year. He leaned against a bench, fake laughing with a product manager about deck polish and investor optics. Then, for no reason except spite, he turned to me, loudly. "Don't worry, Lauren," he said, syrupy and smug. "After Monday, you'll be free to focus entirely on pipettes and lab coats. Leadership is covered." It wasn't insult anymore. It was theater. His final performance before what he believed would be his crowning moment. I shut the freezer door, straightened, and met his eyes. "Let's be precise," I said, voice calm as glass. "This is a federal grant. The authority doesn't belong to you or the board. The terms are binding, and I am the PI of record." A hush spread. Brandon chuckled, but fear flickered behind his eyes like a failing light bulb. Later, a young analyst slacked me. FYI, Brandon asked me to update the Phase 2 milestones to look more dynamic for the board deck. "Do you want a copy?" Yes, I wanted every copy. I saved it in a folder labeled Pre-Vote Edits, right next to the fake invoice to a consultant whose LLC was registered to a UPS box in Nevada. The pressure in the company felt electric. HR suddenly scheduled back-to-back walk-in talks. Anthony avoided eye contact like it might incriminate him, but I didn't flinch. I updated my timeline, exported my archives, rechecked federal clause language, and sent one final quiet email to NIH. Subject: PI status reaffirmation request. The response came within an hour. As PI of record, you retain exclusive fiduciary control until an approved transfer is authorized. No such transfer exists. Documentation attached. Brandon had no idea what Monday was going to look like. But I did. I clicked accept on the board meeting invitation with the kind of calm people mistake for surrender. In the notes field, I typed 6 quiet words. I'll be bringing 2 external observers. No names, no titles. I let them wonder. Across Boston, those observers were already reviewing my files. One was a federal compliance officer from NIH, a man with the posture of someone who had spent 20 years enforcing regulatory statutes without raising his voice. The other was a special agent from the Office of Inspector General, carrying a federal binder stamped with the gold HHS seal, the kind of binder that makes attorneys sweat. They had spent the past 72 hours reviewing everything I sent: Slack threads, email exports, backdated memos, budget discrepancies, invoices made from thin air. Their written assessment was short, stripped of emotion. Misappropriation indicators present, compliance irregularities confirmed. Recommend presence during vote. Meanwhile, Brandon sensed something shifting, though he had no idea what. His confidence became desperate. His outfits got louder, black suits with gold-trimmed glasses like he was trying to manifest competence by accessorizing. He kept referring to the upcoming board vote as a necessary evolution in leadership execution, and told staff we were entering our quantum acceleration phase. That Friday at 5:41 p.m., the sacred hour when cowards send dangerous emails, Brandon made his last mistake. Subject: Q3. Funding allocation. For your signature. Attached was a fabricated invoice requesting $2 million from the federal disbursement account to a consulting firm with a name so generic it could have been generated by a random startup generator. Helix Optimized Solutions, LLC. I searched the entity, formed 3 weeks earlier, registered to a UPS mailbox in Florida. No employees, no website, no phone. The invoice had a blank line labeled Principal Investigator Authorization. He really thought I would sign. I didn't reply. I didn't correct him. I simply saved the email to my chain of custody folder, flagged it, and forwarded it to both the OIG agent and the NIH liaison under the subject: follow-up on prior concerns. Then I shut my laptop and poured myself a glass of wine. The silence over the weekend was exquisite. No Slack messages, no emails, not even a passive-aggressive emoji from Brandon. I imagined him pacing his overpriced downtown condo, checking his phone every few minutes, wondering why Anthony suddenly wanted indemnity language in writing, wondering why HR had gone quiet, wondering why the board chair had asked for a Sunday afternoon pre-read. On Sunday night, I received only one message, from Alyssa, my attorney. They're rattled. You're holding the fuse. On Monday, you light it. Stay professional. Let them self-destruct. And I slept beautifully. Monday, 7:58 a.m., I walked into Boardroom East with my badge clipped, blazer buttoned, folder in hand. Behind me, my 2 guests entered without a sound, one in a black suit, the other with the federal binder tucked under his arm. Brandon was already inside, holding court with 2 investors, laughing too loudly, pretending this was a coronation instead of a reckoning. He didn't look at me when I sat down. He should have. Before we begin, Brandon said, adjusting his cufflinks like he was stepping onto a runway, I just want to thank Lauren for her incredible contributions. Science, after all, is the backbone of innovation. But as we scale, we need leadership familiar with business velocity. He flashed me a smile that was all teeth and ego. After today's realignment vote, Jake and I will take things forward. Lauren can return her focus to what she truly loves: pipettes and gene assays. The room chuckled politely. That's when an unfamiliar voice cut through the air like a scalpel. Is this the man attempting to misappropriate $75 million in federal research funds? Silence detonated across the table. All eyes turned to the far end, where the OIG agent now stood, badge visible on his jacket. No theatrics, no shouting, just clinical precision. Brandon froze. I'm sorry, who are? Special Agent Raphael Curtis, Office of Inspector General, he said. You submitted forged budget documents. You attempted to authorize a $2 million disbursement to a shell company, and you misused federal grant branding. He looked at the CFO. Mr. Ward, can you confirm the identity of this acting CEO? Anthony's face drained of color. Yes, that's Brandon Keller. The company's legal counsel dropped his pen, literally dropped it. It clattered against the table like a gunshot. Brandon's mouth hung open, but nothing came out. I opened my folder and slid it toward the agent. Every page printed, indexed, time-stamped. Emails, Slack messages, fake invoices, the forged budget justification, even the LLC registration for Helix Optimized Solutions. Thank you, Dr. Hale, Agent Curtis said. We've independently verified your materials. This will be entered into the formal record. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just breathed. Because this was never revenge. It was protocol. A board member finally cleared his throat. What happens now? That depends on your cooperation, the agent replied. But to start, I recommend suspending all executive decision-making pending legal review, including the vote plan today. Silence. Heavy. Swift. The founder, Brandon's father, finally looked at me, truly looked, and asked softly, "Why didn't you come to me directly?" "I did," I said, 6 weeks ago, when I said no. And then came the sentence that would end Brandon's career in 7 words. "The department is initiating a federal investigation." Brandon deflated. No anger, just shock, like a child realizing gravity is real. Brandon's voice cracked like a teenager's as he tried to summon whatever dignity he imagined he still had. Under what authority? Special Agent Curtis didn't even blink. "The authority of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services," he said, sliding a document onto the table. "You'll want to forward this to your attorney, preferably one familiar with white-collar defense." Brandon reached for the paper with trembling fingers, his eyes darting between me, the agent, the board, the door. Anywhere he might find an escape hatch. There wasn't one. His lip moved like he was trying to craft a clever line, but whatever sentence he thought he was writing in his head never appeared. The board chair exhaled slowly and looked to legal counsel, who was already typing furiously under the table, probably texting someone who charged $200 an hour. Counsel nodded, defeated. The chair straightened his shoulders. "The board moves to suspend Brandon Keller effective immediately, pending review." His voice wavered. "We will notify investors of the leadership transition." Someone whispered, "Jesus Christ," under their breath. Anthony Ward, CFO, chronic avoider of eye contact, leaned away from Brandon like proximity might be contagious. Another board member murmured to him, "You're going to need your own lawyer." Anthony nodded, blinking rapidly like reality had just slapped him across the face. The giant IPO roadmap displayed on the conference room screen, Brandon's pride and joy, now looked like a museum exhibit for catastrophic arrogance. Silence expanded across the room. Then one of the quieter board members, a man with silver hair and a reputation for never missing details, turned to me. "Dr. Hale," he said, slow and deliberate, "can you stabilize the research program?" I waited a beat before answering. I never let it destabilize. I gathered my folder, nodded to Agent Curtis and the NIH compliance officer, and walked out. No applause, no triumphant music, just the soft click of the boardroom door closing behind me. By Thursday, the company website had quietly removed Brandon's name from every page, except a buried press release about temporary leadership adjustments. By Friday, the board postponed the IPO indefinitely. By Monday, Anthony Ward was transitioning into an advisory capacity, which was corporate language for lawyered up. And Jake, the frat bro turned acting PI Brandon had tried to install, he evaporated from Slack entirely. The digital version of running into the woods and never coming back. But me? I was exactly where I had always been. In the lab. Gloves snapped. Pipette in hand. Running assays. Training interns. Doing the work that mattered. Work that would outlast any ego in a tailored suit. The only real change was my reporting structure. I no longer reported to the board, or to an acting CEO, or to someone with an NFT collection and a caffeine addiction. My reporting line now went directly to the NIH federal liaison. It was cleaner, quieter, honest. Brandon had wanted a crown, something shiny, something loud, but federal law didn't care about charisma or swagger or hype decks. It cared about compliance. It cared about the integrity of research. It cared about the work, and I had never stopped doing the work. In the end, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a mic drop moment or a dramatic showdown. I didn't need to shout or threaten or sabotage. I had something sharper, precision. Precision in documentation. Precision in protocol. precision in choosing exactly the right moment to let the truth speak. And the truth had spoken, loudly enough to collapse a CEO facade built on entitlement and buzzwords. As I logged my assay results that quiet Monday afternoon, an intern paused at my bench and asked shyly, "Dr. Hale, are things okay now?" I smiled. Not triumphant, not smug, just steady. Things are exactly where they need to be. Out in the hallway, I heard the squeak of the compliance officer's shoes as he met with HR. Somewhere upstairs, the board was on a call with their attorneys. Somewhere across the city, Brandon Keller was learning what criminal exposure meant. But in my lab, it was peaceful, focused, honest. I wasn't chasing power or titles. I didn't need to. The work spoke for itself, and it always would. As the NIH officer told me during our final call, some people try to run the show. Others just keep it from burning down. I hung up, adjusted my goggles, and stepped back into the clean, humming rhythm of the lab. Exactly where I belonged. And that was the end of it. Precision over ego. Protocol over chaos. Science over noise. And for the first time in months, the lab felt like science again. Not a battlefield, not a startup circus, not a stage for a man playing CEO. Real science, real work, real peace.